It is time.
It is time. It is time. It is time. I thought you was gonna go straight into Sister Danielle. No, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't know if I should go straight in or if there was going to be another introduction. I will go straight in because I know time is against us. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it is my pleasure to introduce one of our first keynote speakers of the evening. Many of you will remember her from our 8th of February event, which was looking at the Black woman's journey, particularly from a mental health perspective. Granted, she is from the North. As many of you know, she is from Sheffield. But if I'm able just to give you a little bit more of a background with regards to Danielle and her experience, having done her traineeship at the European Parliament, she then went on to be the developmental manager for Race for Justice. So she not only was looking at policy, but also attending tribunals and the like as well. I want to say is a mental health practitioner, but I know she's going to spank me and say, no, I'm not. I know that she works in social and mental health, looking at therapeutic intervention. And she works with a whole plethora of individuals. Doesn't matter if they are coming out of the criminal justice, well, it's not really a criminal justice system, but whether they are coming out of prison, whether it is women who don't have access to public funds or recourse to public funds. And she's also a management consultant in the area of looking at how we can be better placed to leverage our resilience. And so I am thoroughly honored to introduce not only this incredible woman, but my best friend to the platform for you all to meet once again. Sister Danielle, lovely to see you, darling. Take it away, my love.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Hidden Truth family. Really happy to be back. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Brother Andrew. Thank you, Sam. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Andrew.
Wa alaikum salam, my queen.
How are we? Hope everybody is good. I'd just like to say thank you to Lady Wisdom for sharing your story. It was really moving and you touched on some really, really important things, particularly around your trauma and the impact that that had on you, the sexualization of young Black women and not being believed when it comes to sexual abuse and violence. And those are some of the things that I touched upon the last time I was on the platform. I also did see someone mentioning in the comments, they said we need to speak about the strong Black woman trope. And we spoke about that the last time I was on the platform. So I mentioned the strong Black woman trope and how it's killing Black women and how it's detrimental to our mental, physical, social, emotional well-being as well. So thank you so much. And the Angelou Centre representing for the North, thank you so much. Doing some amazing work up there. I'm really, it was great to hear from all of you. So with that being said, I'm going to get stuck in. As you would expect, Brother Andrew, I'm not going to mince my words today. So I would just like to start with the disclaimer and just say this is not to call anybody out, it's not for anybody to be offensive, but it's to tackle the issues head on, because as a community we really need to focus on building healthy relationships, sustaining them and protecting ourselves and our children, particularly protecting Black women. As we know, as I spoke about the last time I was on as well, there's a lack of protection. So I'm going to be speaking about healthy relationships, what they look like, toxic relationships, red flags, and looking at some specific types of abuse as well. What is important to understand is that I'm not going to, as we know, violence and abuse is for the most part a gendered phenomenon in that it affects women to a greater degree, but we acknowledge that there are male victims, male survivors as well, so it's important to know that, and there are some different stigmas that affect men as well. But I'll just get started and we'll come in with your comments and things like that. Any questions, we'll see if we can get to them. So I'm running it like it's my platform. Excuse me. Okay.
Run it, sister. Run it now.
So where is our starting point? So the self. That's where we're starting. If we're looking at building healthy relationships, we need to do what I call whole self work. Okay. So the issue is, whenever we're entering into relationships, a lot of the time people focus on what they want from a relationship, and they come with a list of requirements, but they do this without self-evaluation. So what we really need to look at is, where are we at? Are we ready to be in relationship? And we're talking about platonic as well as romantic relationships. And what can we bring to the table? Because what we need to bear in mind is, we might be the problem for someone else. Yeah, we're not going into that thinking this person might be the problem for me. We might be the problem for someone else. So this whole self-work is really key to do in the first instance. So our starting point is understanding our conditioning. So things that have been handed down to us when we're talking about generational trauma and negative habits and all these kinds of things that have been handed down. And we need to be able to dismantle those things that have been handed down generationally. And this is really pertinent for Black people as well, because a lot of the time what we've been doing is going through life in this survival mode. And if you're in survival mode, you cannot thrive. You cannot prosper, you cannot develop. So it's really crucial that we look at these things. Another thing that we need to look at is something called our schema. Now, what our schema is our cognitive framework. So what this means is, how do we understand and interpret the information that we're given? What do we pay attention to? How we make sense of things? And that comes from our experiences, so how we've seen our pre-existing ideas and beliefs. And once we understand this, we can understand ourselves, and we can start to break down these negative patterns of behaviors and things like that. So for relationships, what we tend to do is, the relationships that we've seen growing up, we see these as the norm, and then we transfer and project that into our own relationships. And that's not always healthy, depending on what we've seen, as we know. So one example of that is, for example, say if we were brought up in a matriarchal environment, a very strong matriarchal home, as my grandmother was the matriarch of our family. It's very female-centered. Sometimes in those situations, not all, the role of men as husbands and fathers can be seen as insignificant, or it's diminished, and at worst, it can be seen as unnecessary or a destructive force. So then, growing up in that environment, you can have low expectations of men, and to expect men to behave in unhealthy ways is the norm, and you expect that. So then this becomes a pattern in our lives, and what we do is we settle for any man because we expect them to behave in negative ways anyway, and we diminish their role, or sometimes people do both. The same can be true for men if they're raised in an environment where women are seen as either subservient, and so they're seen as more of a maid as opposed to being a partner. So those are just some of the things that we might have, for example, growing up. So this can lead into, looking at our schema and how we've been conditioned through our experiences or what's been passed down generationally. There are some traps that we can fall into, which are really important to look at as well. So for example, one of those traps might be, we're in a relationship, or we hold on to a relationship just for the sake of it. And I'm not referring to abusive situations here. I just want to make that clear. I'm not referring to abusive situations, because that's a whole different scenario that we'll touch on a little bit later. So we're in those relationships for the sake of it because we're comfortable. We know what to expect, or we don't want to be alone. And by comfortable is different to feeling safe. I don't want people to get the two confused. It's not feeling safe, because feeling safe, we need to have that in relationships. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit later. So it's just being comfortable. You're accustomed to something, you're used to it. Growth is uncomfortable, change is uncomfortable, and so we want to stay in that space. Now, what we really need to get into our heads is, just because something is comfortable doesn't mean it's positive or it's healthy for us. Yeah, that's really important to know. Another trap we fall into is these superficial relationships. So there's this term going around that Gen Z, or whatever you call them, like to use, which is situationships. My love, you're not in a relationship, you're in a situation, and an unhealthy situation. But people put ship on the end of it because they want to somehow legitimize it and make themselves feel better. This is the thing. So these superficial relationships, and we diminish the role of intimacy, and it can be sold as empowerment. But promiscuity, as I mentioned before the last time we're on, promiscuity is damaging to families and communities. And promiscuity that comes from trauma Promiscuity is a form of self-harm. It's a form of self-harm, and it's damaging. We really, really, really need to understand this. And some people might take umbrage with that, might take offense with that, but it's the way it is. But these things have been packaged to us to show that the empowerment and all these different kinds of things. So we begin to commodify this, and it has no value. And so there's a devaluing of self. And then we give ourselves to people that are not worthy of our time or of our bodies, of our essence, any of it. One thing that I always used to say to young people that I was working with when we were dealing with issues around promiscuity, and even people that were in my own family, is I would say to them, if you do not think that this person would be a good parent to your child, because we know things happen, you have no business laying down with them. None whatsoever. If you don't think they will be a good parent to your child, you have no business laying down with them. And again, we're not talking about people that have been through abuse and trauma and things that have not been, dealt with. But that's one thing that I would say. And some people would go on to do those things. But as my grandma would say, Kia here must feel. But we need to be a bit more empathetic than that, as we know when we're dealing with people that have been through trauma. So this is not about being perfect. It's not about being perfect at all, because even when I'm speaking about these things, I have to do this work myself, consciously do this work all the time, just because it's an area of my profession. We don't all have it right, and it's not about being perfect at all, as I said, but you don't look for someone to complete you, and this is why I call it whole self work. You do not enter a relationship looking for someone to complete you. You enter into a relationship understanding that you're doing the work, you've done the work. Can you bring something to the table? Can you build something with someone? Are you able to bring something positive? Yes. Then keep moving forward with that relationship and continue to do the growth and do the work whilst you're in that relationship. So that's what's really important. So now that's the first stage. We've spoken about the whole self-work. I'm going to touch on a few topics, so I might be skimming over them and not go into them in too much detail, because I just want to cover some key things. So forgive me if I'm moving quite quickly. So what's interesting about the fundamental things that make a healthy relationship, platonic or romantic again, these are the very same things that allow us to develop into healthy, positive, well-rounded, successful individuals that make us resilient, that we can navigate through life. So it's the exact same things that we need to transfer, the same skills, the same traits, into having healthy relationships. But for some reason, when it comes to relationships, we perceive these things to be idealistic, to some kind of lofty ideals, because our standards have become so low. Our standards have become so low, and society is normalized and sometimes celebrated because of this cult of personality, this reality TV, things might be entertaining, have celebrated inappropriate, toxic and dangerous behaviors. And we'll touch on that again a little bit later. So the first thing, which is our superpower, I don't know if anyone might know what it is as I'm describing it, but this thing, the most important key thing that we need, is a superpower. It gives us better overall health, psychologically, physically. We have better relationships, and we even have better academic and business performance. And that is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. I cannot talk about this enough. So emotional intelligence, basically what it is our ability to assess, identify, assess and understand our emotions and those of others. And we can break that down into a few parts. So the first thing is self-awareness, and we spoke a little bit about that before. So that's understanding our triggers and our motivators and the impact that we have on others, So we have to self-evaluate and recognize the patterns and behaviors that we have and how we need to change them. So self-awareness is really important, because what can happen sometimes is people say, well, I know I do this, but that's just my personality, and dismiss it. That's not self-awareness. That's not being self-aware. Being self-aware is saying, I understand my trigger for this. I understand how this impacts me, where this emotion comes from. What am I going to do about it? Because this is the impact it has on my life and on other people. So that's the first important thing. The next part of emotional intelligence is self-regulation. Now, this is the thing that will help us manage those negative and disruptive emotions. And the key thing here is that we will be able to respond to situations, not react. Respond, not react. Okay? And this is because we're thinking through things properly, we're measured in our approach. And because we're responding and not reacting, we can manage conflict better, we can de-escalate situations, and we'll be more adaptable to change. The next thing is empathy. Empathy. Last time I was on the platform, I spoke about empathy a lot as well, and what a lack of empathy can do. And we'll touch on that as well a bit later. So a lack of empathy leads to developmental issues. Yeah. So whether that's effective empathy or cognitive empathy, two different types. So we really need to drive this home about empathy, understanding the world, being able to see the world through somebody else's shoes, being able to understand something called the theory of mind when we put ourselves in other people's shoes and feeling for them. And that's something that Lady Wisdom mentioned as well, which is really important. She touched on it, having that empathy for other people. And that will help us from being so judgmental as well. And social skills. So another part of emotional intelligence is being able to build rapport and build those positive connections. Okay. Communication. Effective communication is key. Active listening. So verbal and non-verbal communication. So what I mean by active listening is listening to understand, not to respond. Listening to understand, not to respond. We're listening for clarity. You can always tell when someone's listening actively because they're taking in the information. They might even pose it back to you and say, so am I understanding this correctly? Whereas when you're not active listening, the person's talking, you're just waiting to get your point across. We need to stop doing that because that's about self. We're not trying to understand or build a rapport or really develop something positive with the person. So active listening to understand.
Danielle, you're going to say that I'm not doing any active listening, but I am, sister. You are a damn good teacher. May Allah bless you, sister. You are rolling. And that's what I said to Samira. You teach in a way you just don't stop, but you make sense. You're hitting some serious points because this ain't no play day, sister. And the things that you're going into is crucial. That's why we called it today, the making of the Black family. Sister, teach from your heart, sister. Carry on, please.
Thank you, Brother Andrew. So, yes, so active communication, active listening. And not only active listening, but think about the way that we speak to people, the way we respond to people, the language that we use. So something called prosody. So prosody in your voice, if anyone wants to look it up, prosody, Prosody, prosody is about our intonation, our stress, and our rhythm. And that really makes a difference into how we're communicating a message. So people communicate differently. As we know, people communicate differently and they like to receive information differently. So how we like to receive information or how we're accustomed to receiving information may not be the same for our partner. And this is where schema comes in, like I was talking before. So our schema, how we are conditioning and how we see things and interpret information. It's really important to know that another person's schema will be different from our own. And this is a discussion that we need to have in our relationships. So you might have said something, you might become frustrated because you said something to someone 100 times and you think they ignored me. Well, actually, maybe they didn't receive what you were putting out because of the way you communicated it with them. So we need to have communication about our communication effectively. So we sit down and have these conversations, especially if you're with a partner, say, I like to communicate in this way. This is how I receive messages. How do you like to receive information? And come to some kind of understanding. Those are the two main things. So emotional intelligence and effective communication. And then we go on to things about honesty and respect. Obviously, those things are a given. Everybody needs to have their boundaries and set their boundaries in terms of what they will and won't accept. Because if you set your boundaries and you allow those to be encroached upon, you're effectively teaching that person, actually, I'm not serious about these boundaries and you can keep going and I'm going to keep taking it. The same that we need to respect the other person's, but honor another person's boundaries. If we don't, can we really say that we have that respect and that love for them? Self-care in our relationships. Make sure that you have space and time for yourself, that you're pursuing your own interests, that you're engaging with people that you love, friends and family, that you're doing things that make you whole. So you're building this foundation, you're building this relationship together, but you need to carry on working on yourselves. As I said, it's this continuous thing, and self-care is really, really important, because nobody said relationships are easy. They're not. But healthy relationships, healthy and positive connections, we get so much out of them. They help us to grow and to thrive throughout our life. Accountability in relationships, taking accountability of our role, the things that we do, not apportioning blame, showing up and taking responsibility for our role in the relationship. Again, whether they're platonic or whether they're romantic relationships, taking accountability of that. Another sign of a healthy relationship is, when people say you really know who's there for you when you go through a crisis. Of course you do, but you also know who's there for you when you're celebrating your successes. And sometimes people leave that out. The genuine people, the genuine test is someone that will celebrate and commiserate with you. And they have a genuine desire for you to succeed. If that person is only there, whether it's a friend or otherwise, when you're commiserating, you have to really question that relationship if they're not there to celebrate you as well, and they don't have a genuine desire for you to succeed. So these are our standards and our expectations that we have to set, but we cannot assume that everybody has the same. We need to have this conversation. And obviously people will always say, well, in relationships you have to compromise. Absolutely. You do have to compromise in relationships, but not on the foundations. I'm wagging my finger at you. Not on the foundations. Not those things that are key to our well-being, our social, emotional, psychological and physical well-being. We don't compromise on those things, on our firm foundations. So some people might be in relationships or situations that we wouldn't want or accept for ourselves. But the key thing is, does it contravene those things? Does it contravene those key things that we've spoken about? What we have to remember is there will be difference in culture, difference in personality, difference in value. But there are some things that are universal. And those foundations that I've spoken about, they might have different language for describing them, but those principles are universal. The need for safe, loving and positive connections. If we don't set these standards, we'll accept anything. So those things are universal. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking about toxic relationships and things that we need to look out for in terms of red flags. So again, because of what we've seen and what we view as the norm and what we've experienced, some people might feel discomfort, and not the type of discomfort that makes you grow. I'm talking about the type of discomfort where you don't feel safe and you lack security and you're always second guessing your situation, your relationship. That is the type of discomfort I'm talking about here in terms of toxicity. Sometimes something doesn't feel right, but we perceive it as normal because of what we're used to or what we've seen in the past. And because of our schema or because of fear, we don't address these things because we think, well, this is how relationships are. This is normal, right? So there must be something wrong with me. So what an unhealthy relationship is anything, again, that has a negative impact on our social, emotional, mental health and well-being. Anything that has a negative impact on that. There is a fine line in terms of toxicity. It can easily fall into a pattern of abuse. The line is very fine. And for the most part, if you're in a toxic relationship, from whichever party that toxicity is coming from, there is emotional abuse happening. But what is key, what we need to understand is that emotional abuse can be coming from another person towards us towards them, or we can be doing it to ourselves. And often in a toxic relationship, that is what is happening. We are harming and we are oppressing ourselves. Again, I'm not talking about abuse specifically, but this can easily tip and fall into the line of abusive relationships. So red flags, what do we mean when we say red flags? So anything that's stress inducing or causes anxiety. Are we walking on eggshells, afraid that we're going to upset our partner, they're going to be in a bad mood today, what's the response that I'm going to get? So ignoring needs, so that can be ignoring our own needs or having our needs ignored by the other partner or ignoring someone else's needs. Carrying the weight of responsibility of the relationship at the expense of ourselves and the other person expecting that we will carry that weight as well. Also, another red flag is one person that has to be the alpha. One person has to be the alpha. And here I'm not talking about head of the household type scenarios. I'm not talking about marriages or relationships where you have a head of household. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is someone in a relationship where they feel they have to be, or they deliberately choose someone where they feel like they are the prettier one, they are the smarter one, they are the this and that and all these other types of things. So they want to be the alpha and to lord things over somebody else. So minimizing success, minimizing the other person's successes. So this is similar to what I said about, do they celebrate with you as well as commiserate? Are your successes being minimized? Do you minimize somebody else's success? Or is your success actually resented? Are your skills and achievements belittled? This is toxic. Do we have emotional withdrawal, disengaging, or the cold shoulder, as it's sometimes called? I think I'm just on message. I think my time is up, but I've got so much more to say. Brother Andrew, how much time do I have, or am I done?
Sorry, sis. Yeah, time has gone. Believe it or not, it just goes
wow.
so quick. But what we're going to ask you to do, sis, because this is such an important. See what Sister Heather Simpson said. Don't stop her. Say I'm going to be the evil one now. People, who's it? Ever say stop the my own daughter, Sister China, saying, "Daddy, don't stop her." Lord gosh, see. We've got Man saying, "Love you, Daniel." Daniel, I don't know what you're doing to me, sis. But believe it or not, we have to move on. I know. But what we can do, sister, and I promise you, God is, if God spares my life, if Allah spares my life, we will come back to this same subject, because what you're teaching is so fundamental, because this platform ain't about just massaging egos or even just, making us feel good. You're teaching things that we need to have to know to make our families work, to make our lives work. So, sister, it's only because we've got Dr. Walcott waiting in the wings, and he's meant to be on from 8 o'clock, that we have to move on.
Can I just say,
please,
just to let you know, obviously, there were the red flags that we're going to finish up, but what I was going to cover is specifically, just so people know, and then if you want to set up a part
don't
2,
rush me, sister. Don't rush it, because you're coming back.
I'll speak about these other things. Yeah, so I will come back for a part 2, but part 2 will be about coercive control, narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic abuse cycle, and the impact of abuse, what to do about it, support systems, and how to effectively support someone if you know someone that's going through it, and then also the impact that this has on our children, our youth, and modeling that. So that's what this is going to cover. Well, you cut me off, so.
Oh God! Now you're dropping patois on me now, sister. Now you're dropping patois on me. Lord,
I'm just going to interject to say, brothers and sisters, a question for you. If there is a way in which we could spend a day going into detail about how we can actually look at emotional intelligence, how we can actually move from vulnerability to resilience, if we can look at all of the different aspects of the narcissistic abuse cycle, how to spot these signs in detail, and therefore how you're better placed to look at emotional regulation, would you be there? Okay, I didn't even finish my sentence, and already, right.
Let us know. Wisdom is said.
Wisdom is on. I know I'm letting the cat out of the bag, brother Andrew.
Yes, I understand. I understand.
Don't be upset with me, sir.
No, you're right. You're right.
Brothers and sisters, we've had a discussion. We did have some talks, and it looks like the appetite is there. So we're going to need you to therefore then be mindful of some dates, because we are going to ensure that the education is available for everyone in the summer. We're going to put together an event so that we can have this training. Danielle will be one of our lead trainers and facilitators for the day.
So brothers and sisters, you got some good news there. We are planning an all-day event. Sisters, just let the cat out of the bag, and I agree with the sister for doing it. Let the cat out of the bag, but we are planning. So that Sister Danielle, Samira, we got some keynote speakers, and it's going to be not online. We're going to get a beautiful place in central London where we can literally put this day on, okay, brothers and sisters. So Hidden Truth, don't let us do this work and you're not backing us, because we're here to take over. We're building an empire. That's the main thing, brothers and sisters.
No,
We're all
Central
about
London.
empire building.
It
And
will
it's
be
gonna be
in Central London, just because I've seen someone said, please not in the sticks. No, it will be Central London. Danielle
London.
is actually going to come down. Stay with me.
I'm traveling down to meet, traveling down.
Yes.
Okay, brothers and sisters, we've got to move on. We've got to move on. It hurts me. It does hurt me, but we've got our keynote speaker, our second keynote speaker, because Danielle was our first keynote speaker. We've got our second keynote speaker, Dr. Walcott, coming on very soon. He's a man that ripped us up last time, got me banned